planetary portents, purposeful silence, and sartorial significance. These are all the elements of Andor's first season that may have blown by you at light speed. During his conversation with Luthen Rael in Andor Episode 4, Cassian Andor describes his time as a conscripted soldier in the Imperial military. He says that when he was 16, after being released from prison, he was sent to fight on a planet called Mimban. Luthen calls out several lies in his story, but acknowledges that Cassian did spend time on the mud-soaked planet before running away. If you've seen Solo: A Star Wars Story, you'll likely remember Mimban. It's the same drab world that the young Han is shown fighting on early in the film. In the greater Star Wars canon, Mimban has been valued for its rich natural resources. As a result, it's been fought over many times by different factions, including during the Clone Wars. While Cassian may not have spent as long on the muddy planet as he initially claims, it's safe to assume that his tenure there was still horrific. If Han Solo's own experiences on Mimban are any indication, there's very little joy to be found when serving the Empire there. The first Andor scene set at the Imperial Security Bureau shows a meeting among senior staff discussing rebel status across the galaxy. At the start of the scene, one officer is heard describing circumstances in the Ryloth sector, warning that extra funds may be needed in the near future to combat anti-Imperial activity. Die-hard Star Wars fans will surely know Ryloth and its penchant for rebellion. Ryloth has a long and dark history of oppression, stretching back to before the days of the Clone Wars. Once the Empire rose to power, the system was subjugated even further. But its citizens' familiarity with tyrannical regimes made it difficult to control entirely. Star Wars Rebels details the actions of the Free Ryloth movement, a resistance effort led by the charismatic Charm Syndulla, and supported at different times by larger sects of the Alliance to restore the Republic. Given the time period in which Andor is set, it makes sense that Ryloth will be a particularly unstable region for its Imperial rulers to deal with. Mentioning the planet's predilection for rebellion is a nice touch, and a great way to show the nature of the ISB right out of the gate. Another matter briefly mentioned during the first Imperial Security Bureau scene in Andor is the increase in supply shipments to Scarif. Of course, that's where the plans for the Death Star were being held in Rogue One. Ending the ISB scene with this subtly dark line sets the tone for the Empire's activity at this point in the Star Wars timeline. But it's also strikingly relevant to Cassian's personal story. Scarif is the place where Cassian Andor dies. It's the end of his long fight against oppression in the galaxy. The Battle of Scarif will likely hang over the audience's head for the entirety of the show, as anyone watching will be intimately familiar with what befalls him there. Because of that dramatic irony, Andor functions in part as a tragic saga. But of course, Cassian has a long way to go before he gets to Scarif, and he makes some big plays against the Empire along the way. When Cassian gets dropped off by Luthen to join other rebels in Andor Episode 4, he's told to pick a new name. It's a smart move given all the commotion he causes on Ferrix, and it's surely not his first or last occasion working under an alias.
Think of a name. Think of a name for yourself. Clem.
If you weren't paying close attention to the earlier episodes, the significance of this choice might fly right by you. A good deal of time is spent on Cassian's adoptive mother, Maarva, in the early episodes of Andor. But he also had an adoptive father who's shown with Maarva in flashbacks. That character, played by Gary Beadle, is named Clem. In another conversation between Luthen and Cassian, it's also revealed that Clem was executed by Imperial agents when Cassian was still young. With all that in mind, his choice of an alias is particularly significant. Not only is he paying tribute to his late father, but he's doing so while fighting against a regime that killed him. Before leaving Cassian to return to Coruscant, Luthen gives him a gift, a down payment. The item is a blue kyber crystal necklace, which has multiple layers of significance. On the most basic level, the necklace represents an attunement to the Force, which has always been a rallying cry for the Rebel Alliance. Also of note is that Jyn Erso has a similar kyber necklace in Rogue One. Given that she and Cassian share their final days together, it's poignant that he also gets one. And of course, kyber is a huge plot device in the greater story of Rogue One, as it's the power source behind the Death Star's super laser. This makes Luthen's gift somewhat grim, as it foreshadows the way Cassian will ultimately meet his end. Beyond all that though, Luthen's gift holds extra significance for those well-versed in the more obscure corners of the old Star Wars canon. Luthen calls the necklace a Kuati signet, referencing the planet of Kuat, which was hugely important in the formation of the Republic in the now-defunct Star Wars Legends timeline. To make things even more interesting, Luthen says that the signet has a special meaning.
The ancient world celebrates the uprising against the Rakatan invaders.
That's a deep, deep cut into the franchise's far-flung past. During the era before the Jedi and the Sith, much of the galaxy was conquered by the villainous Rakatans in the Legends lore. Now it seems that's canon once again. Luthen Rael's strange shop of historical trinkets is home to many hidden Easter eggs, and not all of them are references to the Star Wars universe. In particular, the gallery features a couple of subtle nods to the Indiana Jones movies, which also owe their existence to George Lucas. In Episode 4, Indy's whip can be seen frozen in carbonite. This is clearly a reference to how Harrison Ford, who's played Indiana Jones in every film, was also frozen in carbonite while portraying Han Solo in The Empire Strikes Back. In Episode 5, there's an even more obscure Indy Easter egg hiding in the final scene. Luthen is shown tuning into some rebel radio frequencies in the back room of the gallery, and on a shelf behind him, you can see two stones with distinct markings. These are replicas of the Sankara stones, which play a major role in the plot of the Temple of Doom. It's also worth noting that the Sankara stones are shelved next to what appears to be a pair of Jedi and Sith holocrons. However, these artifacts are much larger than the ones usually seen in Star Wars, so it's unclear exactly what their nature or purpose is. Regardless, they're another fun inclusion. The very end of Andor Episode 6 gives viewers a proper look into the Imperial Senate, a part of the Star Wars universe that's frequently been mentioned but rarely seen. That's largely because the Senate is fully dissolved by Emperor Palpatine at the beginning of A New Hope, following the completion of the Death Star. In Andor, however, the Imperial Senate is still active. In the brief scene, the Senate appears to be much the same as it is in the prequel era. The disc-shaped platforms for each delegation, the echoing acoustics, and the overall look and feel of the Senate chamber are pretty much the same as they are in The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. Of course, the decor has changed a bit, with new pods now emblazoned with the Imperial logo. Watching Mon Mothma attempt to push humanitarian agendas in this void of detached disinterest is bound to conjure memories of Padme Amidala's own time in the Senate. Like her, Mothma seems to be struggling against the established system. Throughout Andor Season 1, Mon Mothma makes numerous references to Ghorman, a major planet within the Empire. Much of her work in the Senate during the Aldhani operation involves the Ghormans, who are suffering because of trade routes being blocked by their Imperial overlords. Mothma is pushing for aid and lifted restrictions on the Ghormans. However, those who have seen Star Wars Rebels will know that things only get worse for them. Several years later in the timeline, a terrible crime is committed on Ghorman, a violent attack from the Empire known as the Ghorman Massacre. During a peaceful protest against Imperial oppression, soldiers opened fire on innocent civilians, killing many. The repercussions of this event were numerous, chief among them Mon Mothma herself publicly decrying Emperor Palpatine's violent regime and the evil perpetuated under his rule. Her subsequent departure from the Senate became a lightning rod moment for the Rebel Alliance. Given that Ghorman is so central to Mothma's eventual departure from the Imperial Senate, it seems only fitting that she'd still be fighting for the planet years earlier. Not only does this detail add dimension to her conviction, but it also connects Andor to the events of Star Wars Rebels in an effective way. When we return to the Imperial Security Bureau at the beginning of Andor Episode 7, there's a familiar face waiting. Addressing Deirdre Miro and her peers is none other than Wullf Yularen, a veteran of the Clone Wars and a high-ranking Imperial official whose history goes back as far as the franchise itself. In numerous episodes of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Yularen makes appearances as one of the Republic's most respected admirals. He frequently worked with Anakin Skywalker and the clone troopers of the 501st, participating in many different campaigns as a strategist and military leader. After the end of the war, Yularen remains loyal to the Empire, working as a leader in both the ISB and the Naval Intelligence Agency. It might be tough for some to understand how a loyal ally of the Jedi became one of the most powerful agents in Palpatine's regime, but Yularen leaves no doubts among those who serve under him as to his ruthless nature. His first canonical appearance in the franchise actually takes place in the original Star Wars, as he's present at the Imperial meeting at which Darth Vader uses the Force to choke for the first time on screen. Yularen's appearance at the ISB in Andor speaks to how seriously the Empire is starting to take the rebellion. In Star Wars Rebels and a number of novels and comic books, Yularen fights tirelessly to root out sedition, even working closely with Grand Admiral Thrawn. Luthen Rail's shop of curios and antiquities is a never-ending source of Easter eggs in Andor. In addition to the artifacts glimpsed in early episodes, Episode 7 features a Jedi relic that should be of special interest to longtime fans. While Luthen discusses the heist in Aldhani with Mon Mothma, a Jedi Temple Guard mask can be seen on display in the background. One of the most enigmatic sects within the Jedi Order, the Temple Guards were sworn protectors of the Jedi's home, secrets, and traditions, until the temple was sacked by Darth Vader and his clone troopers. Since Luthen's shop is on Coruscant, it's not hard to imagine how he might have acquired such an item, especially given his involvement in the Jedi-sympathizing rebellion. One of the more interesting bits of lore in Andor Episode 7 comes from Mon Mothma, who describes her work for the Separatist Coalition to her old friend and potential ally, Tay Kolmar.
I'm a polite, sometimes indecisive senator who spends her days fighting and failing to protect Separatist do-gooders.
Obviously, the Separatists, a galactic faction built up and empowered from the shadows by Darth Sidious and Count Dooku, were the enemies of the Republic during the Clone Wars. You'd think that their defeat at the end of the war would mean their eradication from the political sphere. But it seems that things aren't that simple. The truth is, many planets existed or wished to exist beyond Republic rule long before the Clone Wars ever broke out. And with the Empire presenting a far harsher and more violent regime, it makes sense that there would continue to be tension with those systems. We don't have a lot of details about the non-rebel work Mon Mothma has been doing, but it seems clear that her humanitarian pursuits are directly tied to her more seditious interests. Separatist groups who were already disgruntled before the Empire came to power would make great allies to the rebellion. There's also the possibility that more people have aligned with the Separatist label in the years since the war ended, using its name recognition as a marker of their own desire for independence. The 7th episode of Andor finally shows exactly what happened to Cassian's adoptive father Clem. In the wake of the Empire's rise, soldiers came to Ferrix to assert the new regime's rule. While trying to stop other locals from starting a fight with the Imperials, Clem was wrongfully arrested and sentenced to hang in the town square. His death clearly still haunts both Cassian and Maarva. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this scene is that while the Imperial officer is clearly wearing the new regime's colors, the soldiers are clone troopers, not stormtroopers. This tells us that the flashback takes place in the very early days of the Empire, before non-clone recruits replaced the Grand Army of the Republic. Star Wars: The Bad Batch explores this era in great detail, showing how stormtroopers became the norm in Palpatine's military. Clearly, the citizens of Ferrix aren't too happy with the new order of things, as the whole squabble with Clem starts when one man shouts, "Don't listen properly!" Along with Cassian Andor himself, one of the most beloved characters from Rogue One is K2SO, the reprogrammed Imperial military droid voiced by Alan Tudyk. Equally snarky and capable, K2 plays a major role in the mission to obtain the Death Star plans, and he has a lot of history with Cassian specifically. Anyone looking for K2SO's return may feel frustrated at the end of Andor Episode 7, which features a different droid of the exact same make and model. Viewers might think they're seeing K2SO when the droid in question is quickly revealed to be a much different and more vicious specimen. To be fair, head writer Tony Gilroy told The Hollywood Reporter before Andor even premiered that we wouldn't be meeting K2SO for a while. We're still 5 years out from the events of Rogue One, so there's a long way yet to go. Less an Easter egg than a full-on cameo appearance, Forrest Whitaker returns to Star Wars in the 8th and 11th episodes of Andor, as unpredictable rebel leader Saw Gerrera. Well known for his roles in Rogue One, The Clone Wars, and Star Wars Rebels, Gerrera is just as intense and manic as ever. Luthen Rail journeys to his remote base to discuss a potential alliance with Saw, but his suggestion is rejected. The two men's conversation is quite revealing. Saw complains that the many different rebel factions, including Separatists, Neo-Republicans, the Ghorman Front, and the Partisans, are too different in their beliefs to be unified. Luthen begs to differ. The discussion sheds new light on the significance of the original trilogy's Rebel Alliance and how difficult it was to bring it together. Eagle-eyed viewers will recognize the mercenary Benthic Two Tubes, a longtime ally of Gerrera's, standing watch over the base as Luthen lands. You might also notice the X-Wing starfighter parked behind him. Though Rogue Squadron as we know it may yet be a ways off from forming, it's good to know that the Rebels' most famous ship is already getting some use. Andor Episode 9 reveals that the rebellious Velsatha, leader of the Aldhani heist, is Mon Mothma's cousin. While both women know of each other's illicit activities, they clearly don't share specifics. For instance, when Mon asks Vel something about Luthen, she acts like she doesn't know what her cousin is talking about. That secrecy is a glimpse into the divisions of the early rebellion, and their conversation features a couple of especially interesting details. For one thing, Vel repeats the same dogmatic phrase her lover Cinta says to her in Episode 8.
The rebellion comes first. We take what's left.
To Mon, it might sound like her cousin's loyalty to the cause is stronger than ever, but knowledge of Vel's conversation with Cinta reveals another layer. Vel has had multiple doubts about her rebel work, and her use of Cinta's exact words show how hard she's trying to convince herself of its worth. It also shows how much she misses Cinta, who never seemed to share Vel's misgivings. At the same time, Mon seems to both admire and fear for her cousin. She sees her right after a Senate session that seems to sour quickly. As Mon delivers an impassioned speech about the Empire's overreach of power, she's met with some support, but mostly with apathy. Cassian spends most of the season's 9th episode trying to get to his floor manager, Kino Loy, to give him some information about the prison. He asks him repeatedly how many guards are on each floor, but Loy refuses to tell him. In many ways, Kino represents what the Empire is trying to do to the galaxy, forcing cooperation by breaking the spirit. Even though Kino has to work 12 hours a day and eat food that comes out of a tube, he would rather keep his head down than make waves. After all, his own sentence will be up soon, right? Best just to do things the right way. Of course, everything changes when Kino learns that prisoners are simply being moved to new floors of facilities after their sentences are supposedly up. In the final moments of the episode, Kino realizes that there truly is no escape unless he makes one. He immediately starts telling Cassian everything he knows about the prison. This sudden change proves Luthen Rael's theory. He tells Mon Mothma in an earlier episode that oppression breeds rebellion. Show people a clear way out without having to fight, and many will take it, he argues. But if you show people that there's no way out, they'll have no choice but to take up arms. That's exactly what Kino seems primed to do. Most of Andor Episode 10 is spent on the Kino 5, but there is a brief scene at the ISB, where Major Partagaz gets briefed on the agency's plan to trap a rebel cell led by the enigmatic Anto Krieger. The ISB had captured a rebel pilot from Krieger's cell, but released him back into space, dead in a malfunctioning ship, to assuage any concerns from the rebel leader that the Empire might be onto his plans. Partagaz is informed that the ship has been located as planned by Kafrene Rescue Salvage, a mining outpost and commerce hub. Kafrene is where Cassian first appears in Rogue One. He follows up a lead with a rebel contact there, but ends up killing the contact to secure his escape. That escape is crucial, as the information he gets on Kafrene concerns the Death Star itself. It doesn't seem like the inclusion of Kafrene in Andor is of too much specific importance, but it is a nice bit of connective tissue. Andor Episode 10 ends with a powerful exchange between Luthen Rael and Lani Young, his mole in the ISB. We learn that Lani has been periodically given Luthen information about Imperial operations, and that Luthen has shared some secrets about the rebels to avoid suspicion. When Lani says he wants out, Luthen responds with a powerful monologue listing all the things he's given up to fight the Empire.
I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
It's a deeply affecting speech, and it's magnified all the more by Luthen's outfit. Black robes beneath a flowing black cape. Standing in the shadows of the corridor, he could easily be mistaken for a Sith Lord. The dark hue of his clothes is a far cry from the bright white of the prison outfits of Narkina 5, which themselves represent the heroes Luthen says he's looking for. He understands that his role in the rebellion is to take on all the moral corruption so that others might fly higher and do real good. As Luthen Rael gives his closing monologue in the season's 10th episode, he mentions the heroes of the rebellion, a group among which he doesn't count himself, but which he hopes will grow. As we hear his words, we see Cassian escaping over the barren land of Narkina 5, with Ruscott Melshi, one of his fellow escapees. Everyone knows that Cassian becomes a rebel hero, but Melshi also does big things in the fight against the Empire. Melshi is first introduced in Rogue One, where he fights side by side with Cassian during the Battle of Scarif. Like the rest of the Rogue One team, he ends up making the ultimate sacrifice to ensure that the rebels obtain the Death Star plans. The shot of Melshi and Andor escaping is a bit of hope in a dark moment. an assurance that Luthen's reprehensible deeds eventually become worth it. He lays the groundwork for the heroes who eventually bring about the Death Star's destruction, which in turn allows the rebellion the opportunity to defeat Palpatine's regime for good. The end of the 11th episode of Andor sees Luthen Rael caught in a tricky situation involving an Imperial cruiser, but not one we've gotten to see in much detail before. His ship's computer identifies the vessel, a variant of a Star Destroyer with a long, thin nose and 3 massive tractor beam dishes, as a Cantwell-class cruiser. This ship has a long and storied history in the Star Wars universe. The ship is named after real-life concept artist and all-around sci-fi legend Colin Cantwell, who passed away in May of 2022. Cantwell provided some of the first designs for iconic ships, including the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. He also provided concepts for the Imperial Star Destroyer, which initially bore the look of what's now become the Cantwell-class cruiser. An artist, writer, and engineer among other things, Cantwell worked with NASA and on other major genre films like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. His initial design for the Star Destroyer was meant to appear in Solo: A Star Wars Story, but the scene featuring it prominently was cut. Given how much Cantwell contributed to the Star Wars universe, it's nice to see his original design appear with such grandeur in Andor. In the season finale, the night before Maarva Andor's funeral on Ferrix, Deirdre Meero arrives via Lambda-class Imperial shuttle. The stark white design of the ship has been iconic since its debut in the original trilogy, and it looks just as austere as ever here, standing out against the planet's night sky like a stormtrooper against a brick wall. Deirdre's shuttle isn't the only familiar Imperial ship in this scene, however. As her transport touches down, we can see another shuttle parked on an adjacent landing pad. With 4 thin wings pointing up to the sky, this second shuttle, a Zeta-class, is the same model as the one used by Cassian and Jyn Erso in Rogue One. Stolen from the Empire, the Zeta-class shuttle becomes the flagship of the Rogue One squad. Since the vessel is a pretty standard cargo ship used for transporting troops and cargo, its presence on Ferrix shouldn't raise any eyebrows. But its inclusion also feels like an intentional nod toward Cassian's future. Maarva's funeral ends up being a pivotal moment in both Ferrix's resistance against the Empire and Cassian's own internal arc. By the end of the season finale, he has fully given himself to the rebel cause, and the ship glimpsed in his early shot marks the path he's now headed down. In the season's 3rd episode, Maarva gives a warning to some of the Corpo cops who come to Ferrix looking for Cassian. As the strange, insistent rhythm of the town's chimes keep ringing, the men get unnerved, but Maarva tells them,
"It's when it stops. That's when you really want to start to fret."
In the season finale, this warning comes full circle at Maarva's own funeral. The funeral procession includes a full band, which plays a slow, somber song as they march toward the town square and the Imperial forces stationed there. At one point, the whole parade stops and the music goes silent, only for it to come back stronger seconds later in a faster, more aggressive tune. Then the music stops entirely for Maarva's final hologram speech, leading to the battle between the locals and their oppressors. It plays out just as Maarva warned, so it's only fitting that this is how she'll be remembered. In a somewhat surprising move, Season 1 of Andor ends with a brief post-credits scene. After seeing Cassian commit to the rebel cause and watching the first batch of credits roll, viewers are treated to what appears to be droids constructing something. As the camera zooms out, it's revealed that what's being built is part of the Death Star's super laser. And the real kicker is that the droids are building it using the large cog-like pieces that Cassian and his fellow inmates were forced to construct in Narkina 5. Some fans guessed this development prior to the season finale, but seeing the battle station in its near full glory is still an effective moment. It's both a reminder of where Cassian is headed and a grim picture of what the Empire is doing to the galaxy. The fact that the prisoners of Narkina 5 were being made to build a weapon that would threaten the entire galaxy is perverse, and it emphasizes that Palpatine views his citizens simply as cheap labor for evil schemes. Of course, there's also a bit of triumph in the post-credit scene. It conjures images of Cassian's ultimate victory over the Death Star and the Empire. Even the prison break on Narkina 5 can be seen as an act that unintentionally stalls the development of the battle situation, possibly granting the extra time necessary for the operation in Rogue One to work.